Hi, I'm Skinny Cheeks. Today I'll be going over my updated Stamina Templar DPS build for the Deadlands DLC. A lot of the basic fundamentals of the build are the same as the previous iteration, so I won't spend too much time going through every little detail, but you can find all of the written info for this build and all future builds as well on my website at skinnycheeks.gg. And please remember, treat this guide as a base to work from. Always make adjustments based on your needs if certain tweaks here or there get you better results for the specific content that you are working on. So for this video, I'll take you all on a quick tour of the new website to go through the top race options, our Mundus Stone, the food, drinks, and potions we'll be using, and our champion point slottables, and then we'll cover some of my favorite gear combinations, our skill bars, combat rotations, some tips on getting good speed in your rotation, the results I got from testing on the trial dummy, and then we'll close out the video with a few clips of the setups in action on the trial dummy. One quick thing before we start, if you want to see how you can help support this channel and keep these guides coming, stop by my Patreon page. I'll have a link in the description. There are ways to support for as little as $3 and it really does help. Or just throwing a like on this video and subscribing for free here on YouTube helps a ton too. Alright, let's get into it. So I thought it would be kind of fun, since my website is brand new, to walk through some of the basics of the build by showcasing the website. Future videos will be back to normal, but I figured I'd take this opportunity to show you guys what it looks like over here. Should be pretty easy to navigate to the build page, but I'll have it linked in the description below as well. For the top race options, Dark Elf is number 1 from a pure damage standpoint, followed very closely by Orc and Khajiit. I did most of my testing with Dark Elf, but I did do one test with Khajiit as well to get a comparison, which I'll go over later in the video. For our Mundus Stone, we're generally going to be going with the Thief. The Lover can be a solid option too if you're running with a Magicka-based group that is not optimizing for stamina needs for your penetration, or maybe you're doing one of your daily randoms and you have no idea what you might end up getting and you just want to play it safe and make sure you have enough pen. The Lover can be good for that too, but the Thief is definitely stronger in an optimized scenario. For the food, as usual, we have several good options here. Nothing has really changed with this from the previous patches. And then the same thing with the potions. I still recommend the standard weapon power potions for veteran content. Make sure if you don't want to run these, you either have a support casting igneous weapons for your major brutality, or you can slot the werewolf ability Hircine's Rage to passively get this as well, though that second way is a tiny bit of a DPS loss over just using the potions to get it. For our champion points, we'll go with Master at Arms, Deadly Aim, Fighting Aura, and Backstabber. If you can't flank, you can swap in Fighting Finesse in place of Backstabber. If you are using the Kilt or have a highly optimized group and are going over the crit damage cap, you can drop Backstabber for Thaumaturge. And then for more AoE heavy encounters, it is also recommended to drop Deadly Aim for Thaumaturge, or maybe Fighting Finesse if you do need more crit damage and are under the cap. So that's the gist of how the webpage will look for these going forward, but I will go through the rest of the build in my more traditional format. Alright, now let's go through some gear combos. I won't be covering what each of these sets do or where they come from, but I did a video covering all of the top DPS sets where I go a little more in depth into them, so make sure to check that out if you haven't already. It will be linked in the description. So most of the setups from previous iterations of this build still do really well, but we do have a few new options here as of the Deadlands DLC. So this first setup here is the one that got me the highest damage on the trial dummy at 121k DPS. Big thanks to Bob Delivery for the idea to try this particular setup out. For the monster set, I'm going with Nerien'eth, but there are a lot of other good options that you can use as well. I went with 2 medium in this scenario, but depending on your sustain and also what kind of penetration levels you need, you might opt for 1 or 2 light pieces here. For the 3 body pieces plus our front bar weapons, we're going to go with Kinras Wrath or Deadly Strike. These 2 sets are really close in DPS, with Kinras squeaking out just a tiny bit ahead if you can maintain the stacks that are kept up with light attacks. I'd say if the Kinras bonus is dropping at all in the fight you are in, it probably isn't worth using over Deadly Strike, but up to you really and what you feel comfortable with there. On a stationary fight with good light attack weaving, it should be easy enough to keep Kinras up. Then for our other 2 body pieces and our jewelry, we're going to go with Bahsei's Mania. I'll get into it more in the rotation section later, but Stamina Templar has a really easy time keeping their Magicka pool low to make good use of this set with Ritual of Retribution and Blazing Spear. And since we are mostly stamina based in our abilities, we can really have nice stamina sustain at the same time that we're dumping our Magicka. And then for our back bar, I was using the Maelstrom two-handed greatsword. The Maelstrom bow and flame staff are always good options as well. The two-hander is definitely my favorite, but the others aren't far behind. You could also do the Black Rose Prison daggers on your back bar. I'm not a huge fan of this setup as it dips down a little bit further in DPS, but you do get some extra mitigation from that set and from casting Deadly Cloak. So I did go with Infused on my jewelry here. It is really close with Bloodthirsty. I'd probably prefer Bloodthirsty for a lot of fights that need strong execute DPS, but for overall DPS, Infused did manage to get me a little higher. This setup with Bahsei definitely isn't required, and you can get really close results with some other options, but this is the configuration that got me the highest total DPS, and I actually found it to be much easier to manage low Magicka with this setup than I would on a traditional Magicka DPS spec. Alright, the next setup will be a little more traditional to what you are used to seeing on a stamina DPS character. I did get just shy of 120k with this particular loadout, and this setup will be optimized around using a mythic piece. So we'll be going with a one-piece monster set here, Slimecraw if you don't need the pin, or a pin piece like Krog if you do. Same logic for choosing light or medium here. I went with the light Krog piece for the trial dummy parse. And then for our body set, the best option with this setup for single target damage is Arms of Relequen. Deadly Strike, Sul'Xan's Torment, and Leviathan are also really good options here. For the pants, we'll be doing the Harpooner's Waiting Kilt, and then for the front bar set, the top tier options are Deadly Strike, Advancing Yokida, also called Berserking Warrior, Kinra's Wrath, and Pillar of Nirn. So same as our discussion earlier about Kinras versus Deadly, they are really close. Really just depends if you want to worry with keeping up those stacks on Kinras or not. I actually did parse a little bit higher with Deadly Strike over Kinras in this setup, and I think that might be because we have Relequen going here, and Deadly Strike boosts that more than Kinras does, and also because of the skills we're running with this setup versus the Bahsei setup, we'll have less Burning Light procs, and Burning Light gets boosted by Kinras, while Deadly does not boost it. So those two things combined kind of tilt it a little bit back in favor of Deadly over Kinras in my opinion. They are both really close though, you could definitely use either one. I will show the DPS results of all 4 of these tier 1 front bar setups later. Really, they are all more than viable. And then some other front bar slightly lower tier options are Zogvin, Yondir's Might, Aegis Collar, and Medusa. The jewelry and the body pieces are interchangeable so long as both sets are medium, so you can run Relequen jewelry and 3 Deadly Strike body pieces for example. And I put daggers here, but swapping in a mace is a viable option as well if you do find yourself consistently needing that extra penetration. And then for our back bar, I was using the Maelstrom two-handed sword again. You could use the other options we talked about and it doesn't make a big difference, but the sword was giving me the best results. If you wanted to run this setup solo, one great option would be to drop the kilt, move your ring piece to your leg slot, and then slot the Pale Order ring for the really nice self-healing that the ring gives. And then if you wanted to run this in a little bit safer way for group play, you could also slot the Death Dealer's Fate ring in the same way. And then if you wanted to go with a little riskier setup and content that allows for it, you could remove the kilt, move your piece on your hand slot to your legs instead, and then slot the Thracian Stranglers. These require lots of killing blows to make good use of, but can give pretty insane DPS boosts in the right content. Alright, for this next setup, it is also very similar, so I won't go through it all again, but this is pretty much just showing the monster set variation on it. Nerien'eth is still probably my favorite on Templar, but Selene and Kjalnar are both really close for single target damage. If you are prioritizing AoE damage, then Veldreth or Stormfist should probably give you a little bit better results. And just to clarify, the set combos listed here aren't set in stone on how you have to wear them. For example, you could do Deadly Strike on the body with Sul'Xan front barred, or Yondir bodied with Zogvin front barred, etc. Often you'll want the front bar set to be the one that can carry over to the back bar, and the body set to be a static bonus, but that isn't always the case, as you can see with Relequen on the body and Deadly on the front bar. So I just wanted to clarify that a little bit though. You aren't forced into necessarily running these sets in a particular way like they're shown here. It's gonna get a little cluttered if I start showing like every possible combination that they could be running. So as long as they're both medium, they can go on the body and do okay. Alright, this next setup is one that doesn't use any arena sets and makes use of both a mythic and a monster set together. This particular setup got me 117k DPS on the trial dummy. Mostly the same as we've seen before, except we're doing Pillar of Nirn on the back bar as our two-handed greatsword, and then 4 body pieces. We're doing 4 instead of 3 here because we have an extra piece left over that we have room for in our body pieces, so since Pillar is on our back bar, this will allow that 4-piece bonus to still be active when we are on our front bar. And then for our front bar set, it will be Arms of Relequen. Deadly Strike, Sul'Xan, or really any of the other sets we previously listed would work fine as a front bar option here as well. Doing Relequen on the front bar though, just make sure that you're not spending too much time on your back bar so that the Relequen stacks don't drop off. Alright, now let's go through the skills. If you aren't sure where some of these skills come from, definitely check out ESO Skillbook or ESOU.com. Both have great tools to look up skills. On our front bar, we are slotting Camouflage Hunter, Barbed Trap, Power of the Light, Biting Jabs, Ring of Preservation, and Flawless Dawnbreaker. The fighter's guild abilities we have here are for the passive boosts, but we are keeping up Barbed Trap for the dot and the minor force buff that it provides. If you don't like using Power of the Light, you can definitely drop it and just slot another fighter's guild ability like Silver Shards to give more passive weapon damage. The damage is pretty similar either way, especially if you're using the set Deadly Strike, which doesn't boost the damage of Power of the Light. It is pretty cheap to cast though, so you might find Sustain a little tougher if you do end up dropping it. And then if you want some more mitigation through Major Evasion or are using the arena set that requires it, Deadly Cloak can be slotted on the front bar as well. It is a little expensive to keep up, but it does good damage, and Major Evasion can definitely be a lifesaver in some content. For our back bar, we're slotting Camouflage Hunter again, just as a passive boost, and this is where you could slot Vigor as well if you need a self-heal ability. Then our back bar dot will depend on the back bar weapon type that we're using, so I did Stampede for most of my testing. Ritual of Retribution for a really strong AoE ability that helps a lot with sustain since it costs magicka. Then for this next slot, if you aren't running Bahsei, you can just slot any of the Adric Spear abilities here so that you get the 10% crit damage from the Piercing Spear passive. I like Radiant Ward because it is a decent little shield that could come in handy, but if you are using Bahsei's Mania, I'm slotting Blazing Spear here to give us an extra ability to cast to keep our magicka low. The damage from the spear itself is not too great since it scales with magicka stats, but it does proc our Burning Light passive, giving us some more damage from that, and in turn making it a decent damaging skill overall. Then finally, we are slotting Restoring Focus. This is one of the most densely packed skills in the game. It gives us Major Resolve to boost our resistances, extra incoming stamina regeneration, and a heal over time if we're standing inside of the rune. Then for our ultimate, we're running the Shooting Star ultimate. This is really great if the target is sitting in all of the ticks of it. It is a long duration though. If you need something a little shorter and burstier, you might be better off with something like Fiery Rage if you're using a Destro back bar, or the Ballista ult if you're using a bow on your back bar, or just casting the Dawnbreaker ult on your front bar for the passive weapon damage that it gives you. Carve is another really strong two-handed weapon ability. I wasn't able to sustain it when I was doing my testing, but theoretically it should be worth running for some scenarios if you can sustain it. Repentance is a really OP skill situationally as well. You can get so much health and stamina return, but it does require dead bodies around to siphon off of. It also gives some really nice minor buffs just for having it slotted if you aren't already receiving those from your group mates. And then we talked about this in the potions section already, but Hircine's Rage can be slotted for Major Brutality in place of your passive Fighter's Guild abilities. This is a small DPS loss, but can save money on potions if you're just running easier content. Alright, now I'll cover the rotations. For the non-Bahsei setup, I'm not going to go through this one again line by line. It is unchanged from the previous patches. There are a few options here depending on what backbar weapon you decided to go with, though two-hander does seem to currently offer the highest results at the cost of forcing you into a full melee setup. If you decided not to run Power of the Light, all of these rotations still work as well. You'll just cast Biting Jabs an extra time in each of those places where Power of the Light pops up on the chart. So doing that makes it a really easy rotation, but sustain may be a little bit tougher this way. This graphic, along with all of the other build info, will be available on the website. Alright, so this next rotation here will be set up for using Bahsei's Mania. You could technically still do this one if you aren't using Bahsei, but the skill usage is set up in a way that we will keep our magicka low. And the rotation is pretty much the same, so if you have done any of my previous rotations, you'll find this really familiar. We're just adding in an extra skill to keep our magicka down. I found that between 35 to 40% magicka was the sweet spot to open up with, where I could sustain my magicka pool just about perfectly. You can swap a skill on your bar to pre-dump the magicka. I did Inner Light here, or you could just throw Blazing Spear a few times to dump it. Just make sure not to initiate combat early with the spear if you are dumping it with that. So we're going to open up with casting our Channeled Focus buff for sustain, and then our ultimate, and then Barbed Trap. Then we'll start our light attack weaving with our Stampede cast, Ritual of Retribution, and then go to our front bar to cast Power of the Light, and then back to our back bar to throw the Blazing Spear, and then back to the front bar for 5 jabs cast in a row and end with Power of the Light again before moving into the repeating section of the rotation. So you can also do this a little bit easier with less bar swapping. I just like the spacing of the two magicka abilities a little more so I can better judge how much I have to work with, but it doesn't matter too much. You can just do the same opening but cast all of your back bar dots in a row and then move to your front bar. Just the placement of the Blazing Spear cast is the only difference here. Moving on to the remaining repeating section. So this is the part you'll just repeat for the rest of the fight. You'll see both of the same options are still here as well. You can repeat with all of your back bar dots together. However, I found that eventually my mag would dip a little too low and I wouldn't have enough for that Blazing Spear cast. So if you notice in the second section here, I move it again behind that first Power of the Light cast on my front bar. That gives me just enough time to regen enough magicka if we do get too low. Then after doing it that way for a little while, if you're running dry again, you can just delay the spear cast again and add in an extra cast of Biting Jabs, then recast the spear again when you get to your back bar. So really, spear is just an optional cast here that we are just casting enough to keep our magicka dry, but no more than that. If you watch the parse on the trial dummy later in the video, you'll see it actually manages itself pretty easily. There is a tiny bit of thinking ahead involved to make sure you keep your magicka as low as possible, but overall you can kind of just cast it in either of these two spots and it should naturally work itself out pretty well. One thing to be careful of is if you are casting all three of your dots in a row on your back bar and your ultimate is also ready. If you're running a set like Kinras on the front bar, you will probably lose your stacks casting your ultimate after you cast your 3 back bar dots. So those 4 all in a row. So in that scenario, you'll need to either hold off on your ult or your spear cast and just cast 3 abilities only on your back bar before you go back to the front bar. And if you are running a set like Deadly Strike, this doesn't really matter since you don't have stacks to maintain. And same thing here again with the other rotations. If you aren't wanting to do Power of the Light, that definitely simplifies this a bit as you'll just replace each instance of that with another Jabs cast. You will probably need to keep up your Channeled Focus ability more to sustain doing it that way. And then one final note about this, if you're not running a two-handed back bar, use the appropriate rotation from the chart I showed before this one, and then follow the same principles used here. You'll just cast 1 Blazing Spear with your back bar dots, and then do 1 less cast of Biting Jabs, or delay it until after one of your Power of the Light casts and replace a cast of Biting Jabs in that section. Two-hander does seem to be the strongest, but you definitely aren't limited to using that. Alright, this next section will be some quick tips on getting good speed in your rotation. So in ESO, every skill has a 1-second global cooldown in which you can't use any other skills. One common thing I see from people who are trying to get their DPS levels up is they're not going as fast as they can, often taking close to 1.5 seconds per skill. This can be a bit confusing due to the animations that we see in the game, especially with our main spammable Biting Jabs or the Magicka Morph Puncturing Sweep. So the animation from this skill lasts a second and a half, but the channel itself is actually only 0.999 seconds, so just barely within that natural 1-second global cooldown. I often see people waiting on that animation to end to start their next light attack and cast of jabs, but this is way slower than you actually need to go. So it may look a little bit awkward at first, but if you just cast your light attack and ability at 1-second intervals, you still get all of your damage from it since the damage is actually finished going out at that 0.999 second mark. It may take a bit of practice, and going fast is really tough to land all of your light attacks between, but this is probably the one thing I've seen people get the most immediate DPS increase from. Just try to get used to that internal rhythm of going at 1 second for each skill and no slower. If you are on PC with add-ons, there are some good ones that you can use like Combat Metronome and GCD Bar to have a visual indicator of this cooldown. Otherwise, you'll just have to get a good feeling for that timing. I often hear people say that they can't squeeze as many jabs between each Power of the Light cast as I do, or that their back bar dots are falling off for too long, so I hope this helps a little bit with that to keep that speed up. Alright, and then for the final section of this video with me running my mouth, I just wanted to quickly share the test results from each of the setups I tested on the dummy. I won't have a video clip for each of these, but I do have all of the results and the combat metrics reports posted on the website, which will be linked in the description. Strangely enough, the non-Kilt version of the Bahsei combo squeaked out a tiny bit ahead of the Kilt version. I think that's partially to do with me being able to slot Backstabber without the Kilt, and with the Kilt I have to slot Thaumaturge instead, which is a little bit weaker of a a CP node for Templar. And then I did a Khajiit parse as well with the Relequen, Deadly Strike, Nerien'eth combo, and it was about 1k DPS less than the Dark Elf version. So for non-Kilt setups, this seems about right, as the extra crit damage from your Khajiit passive is actually useful here, but with the Kilt, Khajiit does fall a little further behind, so I didn't even bother testing that one out. And then I did a non-VMA two-hander test as well with the Maelstrom bow, and that was roughly 4k or so behind the two-handed version, so a really solid option there still as well. But again, if you want to dig through all the details of these results, I will have it on my website. Alright, that's going to do it for this guide. I hope this helps you get the most out of your Stamina Templar for the Deadlands DLC. Thank you so much for stopping by, and a big thank you to my current Patreon supporters. If you'd like to see how you can help support the channel through Patreon, I'll have a link in the description below. And a special thanks to Nicholas, Simon, Privy League Guild on PlayStation's EU server, Cougar is Bay in the Cougar City Guild, the Order of War Guild, Iffy, Cantankerous Cat, Shady, Blakewin816, and my wonderful wife. I'll close this one out with some parses on the trial dummy using some of the setups that I showcased. I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye.